We grow up in a world that glorifies attachment. Family is untouchable. Friendship is forever. Relatives must be forgiven because blood is thicker than water. And because of this, many of us find ourselves trapped in relationships that still exist in name, but have long died emotionally. There are connections that require you to brace yourself every time you meet. You must play the role of being fine, tiptoe around every word, and even trade your personal values just to hold onto a bond that is already torn beyond repair. You don't walk away, not because you don't see what's wrong, but because you fear being labeled as someone who is abandoned, fear being alone, fear being judged as selfish. But the truth is, not every relationship is worth preserving until the end. And love is not about endlessly forgiving the things that exhaust you, wound you, or make you lose yourself. This piece is an invitation to look deeply at the connections in your life. Are they still spaces where you are nourished? Or have they become places where you must sacrifice your true self just to maintain an outer image? If you're still hesitating, still feeling torn, still unsure where the line lies between patience and self-harm, then the following 9 signs will serve as a mirror, reflecting with clarity the truth of what you're living through. And maybe after reading them, you'll finally have the courage to say the words you've long avoided. I deserve relationships that allow me to be fully myself. 1. Constant, subtle manipulation. When you begin to doubt yourself instead of the other person. Some relationships don't make you cry, but they slowly make you stop trusting your inner voice. That's when you're being manipulated. Not with fists or shouting, but with gentle words that pierce your sense of self-worth. A manipulative person doesn't need to yell. They only need to plant the idea that your feelings aren't valid, your thoughts are childish, your reactions are exaggerated. At first you resist, but after being invalidated enough times, you start to question yourself. Maybe I really am too sensitive? Maybe I'm the one with the problem? And just like that, you begin to lose connection with your intuition. That inner compass that once helped you navigate the world with clarity. You stop questioning their behavior and instead begin to ask yourself, did I do something wrong? Should I have just stayed silent? The most frightening thing about subtle manipulation is that you don't even realize you're being hurt. You still smile and still call them family, but inside there's an emptiness where your self-worth has been slowly worn down. Remember this, someone who truly loves you will make you feel safe in your different environments, not ask you to question yourself in order to keep them around. If you must trade your confidence and authentic feelings just to maintain a relationship, then it's no longer a healthy bond. It's a form of emotional possession disguised as love. Freeing yourself from manipulation is not about turning your back on others. It's about finally turning towards yourself. 2. Lack of support and companionship. When you're carrying a 2-person relationship alone, one of the deepest human needs isn't to be rescued, it's to be accompanied. To know that in the storm of your life, there's a hand, even if it can't walk your path for you, warm enough to make you feel less alone. But some relationships, once filled with affection, slowly dissolve into indifference, rationalized away by busyness, stress, or unawareness. When you fall, they don't notice. When you're struggling, they're silent. When you long for a kind word, they're too absorbed in their own story. And so, you get used to comforting yourself, lifting yourself back up, smiling even when you feel hollow, because you don't want to be a burden or be seen as weak. Gradually, you become the one carrying all the emotional weight in the relationship, while the other unconsciously enjoys the role of the one who doesn't have to do anything. A lack of companionship doesn't always look like abandonment. It often shows up as emotional absence, as not listening, not checking in, not truly seeing that the other person is wearing thin. A healthy relationship doesn't demand constant presence, but it does require a connection. If their presence doesn't ease your burdens, but instead makes you hide your softer parts, then the relationship has stopped being a refuge and has become a lonely journey for two. And sometimes walking away is not about blame. It's about finding someone who will truly walk beside you, not only when you are strong, but also when you are breaking. 3. Constant exposure to negativity and complaints. When you begin to forget the light you once had inside, emotions are like a stream, and you are the one immersed in it. If the person beside you constantly radiates resentment, negativity, and dissatisfaction, then sooner or later you will either be swept away by that current or drown in it. There are people who don't even realize they carry what might be called an emotional smog. They speak of life as a string of disappointments, speak of others with harsh judgment, and view any joy with suspicion. Every conversation with them doesn't open your mind. It slowly closes the door on hope. At first you stay because you want to soothe them. You believe you're positive enough to maintain the balance. But after enough exposure, you realize you are no longer yourself. Every encounter drains you. Every conversation makes you question your own optimism. The most dangerous part? Negativity spreads like an emotional virus. And when you've absorbed it long enough, you stop seeing the world through your own eyes and begin to adopt the lens of someone who sees everything as wrong, ugly, and disappointing. Love does not mean being someone's life raft as they pull you under. A true relationship is where both people lift each other up, not where you must strain just to protect the last spark of your own light. Walk away, not because you hate them, but because you want to protect the part of your soul that still knows how to shine. 4. Emotional exhaustion after every interaction. When you leave feeling worse than when you arrived, a healthy relationship doesn't have to be cheerful all the time, but at the very least, the presence of the other person should make you feel more whole. If every meeting leaves you feeling empty, mentally heavy, and emotionally drained, then it's no longer a connection, but a form of spiritual depletion. This kind of exhaustion doesn't come from big events. It builds from small, repeated injuries. The indifferent tone when you share something meaningful, the disapproving glance when you show joy. The cold atmosphere needs no words. Over time, you find yourself performing whenever you're around them, trying to seem cheerful, stable, and okay, just to avoid conflict. You start to fear speaking your truth because they're quick to anger. You fear staying quiet because they'll accuse you of being distant. You feel yourself constantly adjusting to match their emotional climate, while losing pieces of your own self in the process. Family shouldn't be a space where you have to brace yourself to be accepted. It should be where you breathe, where you're allowed to simply be, where you are heard without effort or performance. If every encounter leaves you feeling like the one who bears the burden, then this is no longer a healthy bond, but an unfair emotional trade. Sometimes walking away isn't about turning your back on love. It's the first step toward healing, because true love doesn't drain you, it helps you bloom. 5. Lack of trust. When every word must be measured and every silence is misunderstood. Without trust, every relationship becomes a fragile shell. When you can't trust that the other person will keep their word, won't talk behind your back, or won't use your vulnerability against you later, you're not living in closeness, you're living in caution. Trust doesn't require perfection, but it does require honesty and consistency. You can't open your heart in a space where every confession is followed by worry. Will they repeat this to someone else? Are they silently judging me right now? When trust cracks, from a lie, a betrayal, or a sneaky act, the relationship is no longer safe. You find yourself withdrawing, choosing silence over sharing. And every time you want to speak, you wrestle between the desire to connect and the fear of being hurt again. True family doesn't require surveillance. It doesn't demand constant tests of loyalty. It's a place where you're allowed to be yourself without suspicion, where you can speak your pain without fearing it will be weaponized. If trust has been broken too many times, to the point where you have to pretend just to keep the relationship going, then perhaps it's time to choose peace over politeness. 6. When they only talk about themselves and diminish you, when you no longer exist in your own story. There are people who always dominate every conversation. They talk about their successes and their struggles. Even when you're in pain, they'll find a way to turn the story back to themselves. If you've ever experienced this, you know the feeling. You are physically present, but emotionally invisible. Gradually, you begin to retreat. You stop speaking because you know that the moment you start, They'll interrupt or steer the conversation back to them. And if you insist on sharing, they'll do something worse: compare, dismiss, or trivialize your experience. True connection means being seen, heard, and respected. When someone constantly boasts, always claims to be right, better, or more experienced, and you become merely the background character in their narrative, that's a deep imbalance of value and presence. Even worse, this boasting often comes with subtle condescension. They may not say it outright, but their eyes, their tone, and their reactions send the message, you're not good enough to be truly listened to. A relationship that requires you to shrink so someone else can shine isn't a friendship. It's an obligatory existence. And if you no longer feel like you have a place in your own story, then maybe it's time to rise and walk out. 7. One-sided relationships. When only one person gets to be heard. A healthy relationship is always a two-way current of emotion, of speech, of listening. But if you find yourself always being the one who tolerates, who understands, who stays silent, you're not in a connection. You're maintaining a one-sided tie in the name of closeness. You share something, they barely listen. You say something important, they nod without care. You need someone to be there, they're busy. Or worse, they don't even recognize it as important. Eventually, you learn to withdraw, to say less, feel less, shut down, all to keep the peace. But in doing so, you are solely killing a part of yourself. A relationship is not a stage for one with the other in the audience. It's not a space where one speaks and the other endures. If every time you share, the other responds with judgment, topic changes, or dismissive comparisons, you're talking to a wall, not a person. Sadly, many stay in these connections out of fear of loneliness. But the truth is, being with someone who never listens is far lonelier than being alone. You deserve a space where your voice is heard, where your feelings are valued, where even your silence is understood. If that doesn't exist, then walking away isn't selfish. It's the beginning of reclaiming your voice. 8. Personal boundaries are violated. When love becomes control disguised as concern. Every person has a sacred circle, their personal boundary. It's not just physical space, but the right to choose to be different, to have privacy, to say no. But when you constantly find yourself having to explain, ask permission, or being judged just for being yourself, that boundary is being crossed. Sometimes a violation doesn't come as outright force. It wears the subtle mask of blind love. I just want what's best for you. I know what's right better than you. Why won't you just listen to me? It sounds like concern, but in the truth, it's a form of control that quietly erodes your autonomy. You begin to feel the need to behave properly just to avoid conflict. You bend your thoughts. You hide your real emotions. You trade your inner freedom for a surface-level peace. But deep down, you know, this is no longer love. Someone who truly loves you will respect your space. They won't love you by consuming you. They will stand beside you as a companion, not a controlling voice. When someone constantly crosses the boundaries you have drawn, sooner or later you will stop being yourself and become a programmed reflection of their expectations. Protecting your boundaries is not selfish. It is the quiet courage of someone who knows who they are. 9. Lack of respect. When small acts of contempt become deep wounds, respect isn't loud or flashy. It's a quiet, consistent presence. Listening when someone speaks, not belittling what they feel, not making jokes out of things they hold sacred. In a toxic relationship, disrespect doesn't arrive all at once. It starts subtly. A tactless joke, a broken promise, a condescending look when you share something close to your heart. But it's precisely these small moments, repeated again and again, that creates a fracture too deep to mend. You begin to shrink, not because you have nothing to say, but because you know saying it will only be met with mockery or dismissal. You start to measure your words, tiptoe around your truth, filter who you are, because deep down you're afraid of being looked down on again. True closeness doesn't make you feel small. It makes you feel free, in your skin, in your thoughts, in your presence. If someone constantly mocks you, makes you feel lesser, that's not family. That's someone slowly scraping away at your sense of self-worth. Sometimes letting go isn't because you've stopped loving them, but because you've finally remembered you deserve to be deeply respected. Walking away from someone you once loved is never easy. The attachment, the memories, the old promises, they all pull you back. You keep finding reasons to stay. They used to be so good. It's just a tough phase. We've come too far to turn back now. But you forget, a healthy relationship doesn't need you to convince yourself that it's okay. It simply is. It doesn't leave you questioning everything each night or dissecting small details to convince yourself you aren't being diminished. Choosing to leave is not about abandoning someone else. It's about choosing yourself again. It's the moment you stop, not out of hate, but because you're too tired of pretending everything is fine. It's the moment you realize holding onto a toxic relationship is not an act of love. It's an act of quiet self-destruction. You deserve connections that help you grow, that allow you to be seen, to be heard, and to be loved, just as you are, without needing to edit or exhaust yourself. And if you're standing at the edge of a difficult decision, let this piece remind you of one truth. Real love does not hurt you. And if you have to trade away too much of yourself just to keep someone, maybe it's time to let them go.